Good afternoon. My name's Marleen Westerveld and I'm very, very happy to present some of our exciting research to you this afternoon. So let's look at the literacy profiles and literacy predictors for early learners on the autism spectrum. First of all, I need to acknowledge my amazing team, and as you can see, quite a few people were involved. So I won't name them all individually, but I'd really like to express my sincere thanks to this whole team. So what is the rationale for our program of research into literacy of kids with autism? You probably appreciate that autism spectrum disorder affects about 1 in 200 school-aged children in Australia. 95% of these children experience challenges in education due to social, communication and learning difficulties. What you may not realize is that about 50% of children with autism struggle to read, and that some children with autism do not learn to read at all. And these aren't just the children, but the children who have low nonverbal intelligence. These are actually children across the autism spectrum and skills at all levels. Now, a majority of children with autism show difficulties in reading comprehension, but not all of them. And really then, an improved knowledge of the development of early literacy skills in children with autism will really help guide our intervention practices and inform future research. And that's what we're all about, really. So let's look at our overview of our Autism CRC program of research. We've been very, very lucky to get funding for our line of research. Back in 2015, we obtained an innovation grant to describe the emergent literacy skills of verbal preschoolers on the autism spectrum. Then the year after, we got 2 innovation grants. One was to follow up this initial cohort of preschoolers to see what their literacy skills would be like in their first year of schooling. And then at the same time, we got a grant to look into shared book reading intervention. It was a new cohort of students, and we wanted to see, can we change or improve some of these skills during the preschool years. And then we're moving into 2017, 2018, and we're going to look at translating some of these findings. And the project is called Storytime in Libraries. So I'll talk a little bit about that later on. All right, so a brief overview of the presentation. I've got about 40 minutes. So first of all, we'll look at emergent literacy, and just to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. We'll unpack some of the constructs that are involved in emergent literacy development, and I'll show you a couple of brief video clips, examples of tasks. And then we'll look at emergent literacy or literacy development in children with ASD. So what do we know, and actually what did we find before moving into future studies? Okay, so emergent literacy. Children really are typically in the emergent literacy stage from birth to about 5 years of age. So during this period, most children will show a keen interest in print, pretend to read books, play with writing utensils or write stories on the board, enjoy sharing books, participate in sound games, like rhyming words or alliteration, so what words start with a B sound, for example, and use literacy themes in their play, like I'm the big bad wolf, that sort of thing. We also know, if we're thinking about some theoretical underpinnings, that literacy development starts at birth and that many milestones are achieved before children start school. And that's important to know, because that means that we can start looking at those early literacy milestones before children commence formal schooling. It's also important to point out that there's this bidirectional relationship between literacy and language development. So good, solid oral language development in the preschool years will sort of support early literacy learning, but once children become literate, actually their reading exposure to written materials will really boost their language skills. We need to realize that children are active participants in the literacy development process, but they acquire much of their literacy knowledge incidentally. So a lot of typically developing children will not need to be taught these early skills, and we'll look at early skills in a minute. We know that literacy development is guided by adults, and what is really good to know is that early literacy achievements tend to follow a developmental sequence. So following a developmental sequence is important because it will really help us monitor development, but also to have some expectations of sort of typical development and how to assess. So, some of you may have learned or heard about the simple view of reading. And this simple view is very simple, and it really looks at the links between oral and written language. So let's see what that means. It actually, the simple view of reading says that reading comprehension is the product, so it's an X, so a times, not a plus, of word recognition and language comprehension. So that really holds that without word recognition, there is no reading comprehension. Well, that makes sense. Because if you read, I can't read Chinese characters, for example, so without being able to recognize those characters, of course there's no reading comprehension. But also we need good solid language comprehension, because you may be able to decode the words on a page without the ability to attach meaning to those words. There is no reading comprehension. So for example, I could read Samoan, because Samoan vowels are very similar to my Dutch vowels, but because I do not have the language comprehension, I cannot comprehend what I'm actually reading, despite the fact that my decoding probably is pretty good. So, as I said then, for reading comprehension to occur, none can be equal to 0. We need to acknowledge that there are unique contributions of word recognition and listening comprehension to reading comprehension. So they're changing contributions over time. And what that basically means is that initially when children are learning to crack that code, their language comprehension doesn't exert a big influence on reading comprehension, because they're really focusing on decoding individual words. But once they've cracked the code during year 3 or 4 of schooling, and can read what's on the page, language comprehension will exert the biggest influence on reading comprehension. So if we then look at emergent literacy skills, so those skills that develop before children start their formal reading tuition, we could divide them up into code or print-related skills that lead to word recognition and meaning-related skills that are needed for language comprehension. So what are those print-related skills and those oral language or meaning-related skills? And the biggest predictors are, under print, phonological awareness, and I'm going to unpack those in a minute, letter knowledge and print concepts. And then oral language-related skills are really vocabulary knowledge, grammatical ability, and discourse skills, or storytelling and comprehension skills. Of course, we cannot leave out the importance of the home literacy environment. So what we do know is that the frequency of shared book reading, for example, is positively related to expressive vocabulary in 4-year-old children with typical development, and that this frequency of book reading is also associated with higher levels of print knowledge. So higher ability or better ability to identify letter names and letter sounds. Interestingly, the relationship between the home literacy environment and emergent literacy for children with language impairment is not as clear, and there's quite a bit of research going on at the moment. And we also, of course, apart from frequency, really need to look at the quality of shared book reading. And I'll come back to that a little bit later when I talk about our shared book reading intervention. So, our first CRC-funded project actually arose from a systematic review of the literature that we conducted prior to getting this grant, which showed that worldwide only 3 teams had investigated this, the emergent literacy skills of preschool children with autism, but none of them had really focused on kids that year prior to formal schooling, and looked at a large enough group of kids with autism to draw accurate conclusions. So the first project has just been published, and if you would like to receive a copy of the paper, if you cannot access that through your organization, then please feel free to email me. My contact details are on the final slide, and I'll email you a copy. So what did we do? We recruited 57 preschoolers who met the criteria for autism spectrum disorder. And our entry or qualification criteria were that they had to be able to speak in short sentences and participate in preschool type activities, because all of the tasks really needed the kids, of course, to participate, and some verbal answers were required. So they all attended for 2 sessions, 2 separate sessions, and we assessed them on a whole range of tasks, as you can see on the table on the left-hand side. So they were related to print-related skills and meaning-related skills. We adapted all of these tasks for duration and language complexity. It's very interesting to see how complex some of these tasks that we use with our typically developing preschoolers are from a language point of view. So we wanted to make sure that they were as accessible as possible for our population in this study. So we also asked parents to video themselves reading a book at home as they normally would, and we asked them to complete a home literacy questionnaire. So our research questions were quite simple, really. We wanted to know, how do preschoolers with autism perform on print-related and meaning-related emergent literacy skills? And are oral language skills, nonverbal cognition, so IQ, and autism severity associated with print-related and or meaning-related emergent literacy skills in preschool-age kids with autism? So this very busy slide really shows you the age of the children, so between 4 and 5 and 8 months. The SEQ is the social communication questionnaire, so that's really to confirm autism status. We looked at IQ, we looked at the violent adaptive behavior scales, the communication aspect, it's a parent report measure, and we looked at the Peabody picture vocabulary test. So this is really to describe our participants' demographic variables. What I want to point out is that even though the mean of communication, for example, is 83, so just below normal limits, and the average score on the PPVT standard score is 90, so again within normal limits, considering that between 85 and 115 is considered within normal limits. I'd like to point out that the range actually is quite wide. So by no means did we recruit a group of children with autism who are in the very high functioning range. And as you can see, nonverbal cognition between 44 and 119, and on the PPVT between 64 and 127. So we can definitely see a wide range of performance. All right, so let's look at some of these constructs, and I just wanted to show you how we assessed some of these. So first of all, letter knowledge. We asked kids to recognize or name the letters, and we wanted to know the sounds that the letters would make. So I'm going to show you a brief video clip of Byron completing this task.
All right, Byron, point to each letter. Tell me the name of that letter. Ready? Perfect. Let's look up here. You point to the letter. Point. Yep. What letter?
Letter E.
Keep going.
Letter N.
We're just going to see if you
recognize.
Again, he doesn't have to.
E. Letter Th. Letter V. Letter V. Letter V. Letter V. Letter V.
So as you can see, we clearly adapted the task, but Byron was happy to participate, and we were definitely able to assess his skills in this area. So what did we find? We found that letter name and letter sound knowledge. So you can see that the maximum score was 26, for example, on letter names. And we had a mean score of 16. So you can see in the graph the sort of distribution of scores. Based on the PALS, we used the PALS, which is test scored on American kids, and we used the pre-kindergarten norms for that. And we saw that 63% of our children scored within or above the expected range for pre-K children. So that was on letter names, and on letter sounds we saw scores between 0 and 25 with a mean score of 9. And again, 53% of kids scored within or above the expected range. So as a group, they did quite well, but huge variability in performance. So let's look at phonological awareness then. Most of you will hopefully be familiar with this construct, but it's really the conscious awareness of sound in spoken words. So we know that it typically develops from larger to smaller linguistic units. So the largest units would be syllables, knowing that table has 2 syllables. Onset rhyme is identifying the first sound in a word. And then at phoneme level is really breaking little words apart, like bat has b, at, and you put them together and you get bat. We know that phonological awareness can be seen in children as young as 3 years of age. But how do we assess phonological awareness in young children? We use an onset rhyme task with our children. And then again, we adapted the task. And I'm going to show you a brief video to show you how we did this task. Just need to start it.
With the sound. Map.
Yeah.
High five. Well done. What's next?
Next is...
Oh no. Sick.
Sick.
What sound does sick start with?
On and a bit. I'm gonna do it.
So sick starts with the S sound. Where does it go?
In the doctor's.
You do go to the doctors when you are sick. Put it over here. Sick starts with the S sound. Oh.
So how did the children perform? So again, maximum score was 10. Again, we can see a huge variability in performance, range of performance, I mean, between 0 and 10. A mean score of 6.8, which actually showed that 75% of the children scored within or above the expected range for pre-K children. We looked at print concepts. So for this task, you share a little book and you ask children to point out the words on a page, short words, long words. You ask them to point to some letters, to hold the book the right way up. And you ask them where you start reading, where you finish reading, what's the end of the sentence. Children can get a score, maximum score of 10 on this particular task. Our participants got a mean of 5.1 and 40% scored within or above the expected range for pre-K children. We looked at story comprehension. So for this task, we asked children to listen to a novel story, Anna Gets Lost. And then after they listened to the story once, we asked them 8 comprehension questions. So the scores, possible scores between 0 and 8. The mean was 1.4, and we can see that 16% of the kids scored within the expected range for 4-year-old children. And that expected range for here would be above the 25th percentile. So that would mean that our typically developing cohorts from New Zealand and Australia, 75% scored within the expected range. And I just wanted to point out that if we link that to their performance on the PPVT, which is receptive vocabulary, we had 54% who scored within normal limits. So it was really over and above their vocabulary scores, or significantly below, I should say. They really struggled with story comprehension. We also looked at their story retelling. So after listening to the story a second time, we asked them to retell the story. We then score it on quality, and actually the maximum score for quality is 40. They had a mean of 6.7, and again, only 14% of children scored within the expected range for 4-year-old children. So we then wanted to look at multiple regressions. So that may sound harder than it is, but we really wanted to know, okay, so if we look at print-related ability scores, what predicts the variance in their ability? And as you can see on this slide, it was predicted by autism severity, measured on the social communication questionnaire, their IQ, as well as their spoken communication and receptive vocabulary. But interestingly, only vocabulary was a significant individual predictor of their overall performance in print-related skills. So there were letter name and sound knowledge, print concepts, and phonological awareness. Then looking at meaning-related ability, so looking at their vocabulary and storytelling and comprehension, 40% of the variance was predicted by autism severity, IQ, and spoken communication, and all three were significant individual predictors. Just briefly before I summarize this part of the study, we also looked at nonverbal cognition. We were really interested to find out, how does IQ, what does IQ mean? Do kids with lower nonverbal IQ perform significantly worse than kids with a higher nonverbal IQ? And what we found, actually, very interestingly, there were no differences between these two groups on letter name knowledge or phonological awareness. But there were small to medium effect sizes for group differences on all other measures. So regardless of their IQ, they performed similarly on measures of letter name knowledge and phonological awareness. So in conclusion then, the task seems suitable and doable for verbal preschoolers with autism. And we're in the process of putting up these tasks with demonstration videos on a website somewhere, so that they will be freely available for you to download and use in daily practice. As a group, the children showed relative strengths in print-related skills of phonological awareness, letter name and letter sound knowledge, but they had significant difficulties in story retelling and comprehension. Vocabulary knowledge showed significant correlations with both print and meaning-related emergent literacy skills. And I'm going to come back to that when we talk about our shared book reading intervention, because we really wanted to see, can we boost children's vocabulary knowledge through shared book reading, just because we can see how important it is for their emergent literacy development. All right, so that leads me to our second project, the predictor study. This is hot off the press because we've only just started analyzing the results. So from the original 57 families, 41 families were seen for follow-up. And at this stage, children had attended prep for 6 to 12 months. They were assessed on measures of reading accuracy, reading comprehension, and phonological awareness. And you can see on these slides the kind of measures we've used. So just very briefly, participant details. Months of schooling between 4 to 12 months. We administered the self-core language just again to describe our participants' language skills. And what you can see again, a big range in performance between 45 and 122, knowing that between 85 and 115 is considered within typical limits. And we also looked at their percentage of phonemes correct on the DEEP, which really looks at their articulation skills, and between 59 and 100%. So that's an interesting finding. That's a little bit of a side issue, but quite a few kids really still struggled with their phonological processes or the way they pronounce sounds when talking. So some preliminary results, and again, this is quite a busy slide, but I just wanted to point out some interesting findings. First of all, the highlighted yellow shows you how many children were able to participate on the reading accuracy and reading comprehension tasks that we used the YAC, so the York Assessment of Reading Comprehension. So only 50% or just over 50% of the kids were able to obtain a standard score, even though that test is normed from 5 years, 6 months. So all our kids were within that sort of age range. Furthermore, we looked at regular words, irregular words, and you can see the Z scores at the top. So 56% within normal limits on regular, 51% on irregular. Phonological awareness, we used the Sutherland Phonological Awareness test, 61% within normal limits. And letter sounds, 71% within normal limits. Concerningly, of course, right, at the top right-hand bottom, that 95.5% of these children already have difficulties in reading comprehension. So that's very, very early on in their school careers. So, as I just said, approximately half of the children were able to participate in this test. 56% of the children showed significant reading accuracy difficulties. So, despite the fact that we often think of kids with autism as being super decoders and hyperlexia has been linked to kids with autism, the reality is that about half of our cohort had difficulties this very early on in their schooling careers. And again, I need to point out that these weren't just, these were children from, very able children to sort of children who were struggling on a lot of our tasks. But they were all verbal preschoolers before they started school. And just over 80% had early reading comprehension deficits. So of course we want to know then is which preschool emergent literacy skills are predictive of early reading accuracy and comprehension skills. And we want to know which prep skills correlate with reading accuracy and comprehension skills, because that is going to really direct our intervention efforts. So what we did is we used the ability score, so that's on the first passage of the YAC, because all children were able to participate in that very first passage, even though they didn't get a standard score at the end. And well, actually 39 children were able to get an accuracy score and 36 a comprehension score. And really, really interestingly, the best predictors for reading accuracy in prep was letter sound knowledge at age 4. And for reading comprehension, it is receptive vocabulary and IQ or nonverbal intelligence at age 4. So then looking at concurrent correlations, after controlling for nonverbal intelligence, reading comprehension ability in prep showed significant correlations with story comprehension, really significant, and their standardized test scores. And reading accuracy ability in prep showed significant correlations with single word reading, letter sound knowledge, and phonological awareness, as you would expect from typically developing students. So the third one is really looking at our shared book reading intervention. And what I want to do here is I want to show you a little video that provides you with an overview of what we did, what we found, and what parents actually told us. So this really then goes back to our initial study where we found how important vocabulary learning and shared book reading was to encourage emergent literacy skills in typically developing children. Very few research studies have been conducted up to this stage with children with autism, and this was definitely the first sort of randomized control study, even though it was very small numbers, that was done worldwide. So what we wanted to do is really target their meaning-related emergent literacy skills in a context that is part of most families' routines. So we didn't address print knowledge or letter sound knowledge. We really worked on vocabulary building, what's in a story, and having fun. So this video takes about 5 minutes.
This project investigated the effectiveness of an 8-week shared book reading intervention for optimising parent-child book reading behaviours with the goal of promoting a better understanding of stories and book-related language for children on the autism spectrum. We targeted 3 strategies: words, 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 what's in the story, and fun times. Words, words, words. Point out new words in the pictures, provide word definitions, and relate new words to your child's own life experiences.
And he couldn't catch a single fish to cook. Single means one. He couldn't catch any fish.
What's in the story? Discuss the story before you start reading. Comment on story features such as the characters or problem, and then summarise the story once you've finished reading.
And that made Pip feel
Sad.
So what did they do about it?
Right.
Make it fun.
We don't got eyes like that.
No, we don't have eyes that are outside our head.
Bang!
It popped.
Under the water.
Under.
What we found. Parents increased in the length of time they spent reading with their child and included more book-specific language. The children were noted to be more talkative and to be using a greater variety of words during the reading sessions. What did the parents tell us? Thinking back before the intervention, did you have any challenges with shared book reading with your child?
The only challenge I found was being creative with the stories and not knowing how to kind of elaborate on things and not having any idea how to kind of... Some stories you can make interesting but have that interaction with him as well in the story. So we just kind of read the book and that would be that.
What were your overall impressions of the intervention?
I found the intervention really easy to use, and once we broke May's habits around reading, which was probably a real challenge to break those habits of what she enjoyed, once we got through that barrier, she was very much enjoying the sessions. We were enjoying the sessions, and I definitely felt that her understanding and use of language improved throughout the period.
Has the intervention changed the way you read with your child?
With our speech therapy sessions, we've extended on the intervention program, and Billy is now also working through a series of first readers. Overall, the intervention was a positive change and has benefited our whole family.
It's just really lovely to see the way that the parents took on board the strategies that we suggested, and they were so committed to changing the way that they read with their child. The children also responded well to the strategies that their parents were using, and it was so exciting to see them interacting more with both the book and their parents. Children that were initially quite rigid with their book reading selections generally became more open to sharing new stories, which we love to see because that means that they are then being exposed to new words and story concepts.
And what's next?
So we're currently sharing our findings with speech pathologists and other educators who are involved or working with young children on the autism spectrum to find out how best to use some of these results in daily practice, or out in the real world, I should say. We're also entering into a partnership with the libraries to find out how we can share our results in the broader community.
So, future directions. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Future directions. So as I mentioned at the start of this presentation, we are embarking on a storytime project. We've been very lucky to get another translation grant. And this involves the First Five Forever team of the Brisbane City Council Libraries. So watch this space, because we are definitely going to try and implement some autism-friendly storytime sessions in local libraries that are run by librarians. We're also creating a video outlining our results of our predictor study that will contain a checklist for teachers on how to check early literacy progress in students on the autism spectrum. So we're going to include tips on how to best assess, what tasks to use, and what are the red flags and what to do about it. And we really want to move towards investigating ways to provide targeted intervention for young school-age children on the autism spectrum who show early signs of reading difficulties. So, for now, fostering emergent literacy development during the preschool years is important to aim for reading success for all children, including those with autism spectrum disorders. Assessment of emergent literacy skills is doable and predictive of early reading skills once children start school. Monitoring early literacy development is vital, considering the high levels of literacy failure in this population. And we need to really look at providing early targeted intervention. I think literacy in autism is an overlooked area. And if we appreciate how important it is to be literate, to sort of participate fully in the community, to get a job, you know, to do well at school, to feel good about yourself, then really I think we need to raise awareness of the importance of literacy learning for all kids, but definitely including those on the autism spectrum. So that's all from me for now. And if you want more information, then please feel free to email me, and I mean that. Visit the Autism CRC website for reports on our studies, and you can also follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much.